Listen up! None of you have to go. But we are the only help they have. 2 vehicles, station ready. Let's go. Move!
Hello, Canada, and the world at large. This is Lane from Canada. I just realized that this is my first time reviewing a true story. Now, to be fair, I previously reviewed true stories in The Ghost in the Darkness and Tombstone, but I put The Ghost in the Darkness at about 25% true story because Michael Douglas didn't exist, and Tombstone at 48% on the high end because Patrick Swayze didn't do justice to Wyatt Earp's invisible brother Warren, and Josephine Marcus kept rewriting history because she didn't want the world to know that Wyatt was very likely a whorehouse pimp. Now I'm reviewing a true story of tragedy and heroism told with roughly 87% reverence by freaking Michael Bay of all people, who gleaned even the smallest details from a comprehensive book compiled by the men who were actually there. I owe a similar reverence to the elite heroes involved, fallen or surviving, and any one of the survivors could physically hurt me if they don't like my spin on this. Just saying, there's a burden with this one. Welcome to Post Before Movies Sucked, and this is 13 Hours. I remember comedians making jokes about Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi back in the early 80s when I didn't even know what Libya was. With over 40 years in power, he was one of the longest ruling tyrants of the past century, and his violent overthrow and death in 2011 was a great example of why tyrannical overthrows need to have a follow-through plan. Instead, Libya became a free-for-all between street gangs and rival warlords, which was made exponentially worse after Gaddafi's armories were plundered by the various militias. With Libya ranked as one of the most dangerous countries on Earth, most of its foreign embassies were quickly shuttered and evacuated. In the battle-ravaged city of Benghazi, the US government established a covert CIA base called the Annex in an attempt to stem the outflow of black market arms, peripherally aided by the most Western-friendly militia known as the February 17th Martyrs Brigade. A small elite group of ex-military contractors, codenamed GRS, were hired by the CIA posing as weapons buyers to reacquire the most lethal arms and prevent them from spreading across the globe. In 2012, GRS operator and former Navy SEAL Jack Silva arrives in Benghazi to begin his rotation at the CIA Annex, covertly greeted at the airport by his close friend, paramedic, and former SEAL team brother, Tyrone "Roan" Woods, who was in command of the GRS team. En route from the airport, Silva is quickly introduced to the dangers of Benghazi when their vehicle is stopped by a roadblock manned by Ansar al-Sharia, an extremist jihadi militia who show no regards for Roan's Libyan government visa. Roan requests GRS backup, but the CIA station chief, Bob, instead attempts to activate the largely unreliable 17 Feb militia, not wanting to expose the Annex. After an armed standoff, Roan bluffs the Ansar al-Sharia commander into believing that they are being overwatched by an armed predator drone, and they are allowed to proceed.
Hey, Chief.
I don't want to hear it, Tyrone.
No, I understand. I see what you're going for here. Secret spy base with fortified walls, gate cameras, and blue-eyed Westerners walking in and out of this place all day long. But if you want to avoid...
That's so rude. Can't believe you just did that for me.
At the Annex, Silva meets the rest of the GRS team, former Marines Tig, Boone, and Oz, and former Army Ranger Tonto. Over the next months, they successfully carry out a variety of missions, including weapons buybacks and providing security for undercover CIA officers attempting to make useful connections with Libyan business people and government officials. However, they are constantly in danger of discovery and confirm they are under surveillance, and one of their undercover meetings ends in a violent car chase from which they narrowly escape. The US government has maintained a secure embassy in the Libyan city of Tripoli, also protected by a GRS team, led by another former teammate of Silva and Roan, Glenn Doherty. In an effort to build positive relations with the interim Libyan government, US Ambassador John Christopher Stevens is dispatched to lead the diplomatic mission. To prevent the appearance of hostility, he travels to various meetings with only a 5-man diplomatic security service team and minimal staff, including an IT specialist named Sean Smith. GRS is assigned to provide additional security and driving services during the ambassador's public appearances. In preparation for the ambassador's visit to Benghazi, GRS and the DSS Advance team assess the temporary U.S. Special Mission outpost that has been set up in a luxury villa a mile away from the Annex. The veteran soldiers are troubled to realize that the villa's perimeter would be indefensible against any significant assault force, as it lacks basic embassy security features such as car bomb barricades and a contingent of U.S. Marines. Additional protection is only available from underpaid Libyan security guards with no loyalty to the Americans they are safeguarding. It is also revealed that even the DSS team has minimal previous military experience. Protecting the ambassador in public is a constant challenge, as his supposedly closed-door meeting with the mayor of Benghazi is suddenly surged by media and civilians, making it impossible for the soldiers to monitor any potential threats.
Hey, these militias, they have unlimited firepower and they can coordinate. You've got to keep his moves low.
Yeah, well, we were supposed to be closed door. Someone from the city council tipped the media.
As the 11th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks approaches, Stevens recognizes the weakness of the villa and makes multiple requests for additional security measures to be provided from Washington. He also notices and reports various incidents of unauthorized surveillance being carried out by Libyan police officers whose allegiances are as likely to lie with the jihadi militias as with the government. To maximize security on the dangerous anniversary, Stevens agrees to remain within the villa for the entirety of September 11th. The day passes quietly, but as night falls, a force of heavily armed Ansar al-Sharia militants march on the villa, beginning a frontal assault at approximately 9:42 p.m. The posted Libyan police officers and 17 Feb guards immediately flee, allowing the terrorists to easily breach the front gate. The hopelessly overwhelmed DSS agents fall back to various defensive positions across the compound, primarily attempting to remain unseen. Agent Wickland secures Ambassador Stevens and Sean Smith in the villa's armored safe haven, while lead agent Alec contacts GRS at the nearby annex, informing them that the villa is now under siege. We are shown that Washington and American military bases in neighboring countries are quickly notified and put on high alert. Oz is the only member of GRS away from the annex, providing security for a CIA officer named Sona, who is conducting an undercover meeting. Roan urgently orders him to cut the meet short and return to the annex, while the remaining GRS team prepares to deploy to the villa. However, Bob is not given authorization to dispatch the team, as his CIA superiors plan to use 17 Feb as the first responders, still unwilling to expose the existence of the annex. Agonizing minutes tick by as the soldiers are forced to listen to the distant gunfire and pleas for help over the radio.
I mean, seriously, guys? If the consulate ordered a pizza, it would have been there by now.
Unable to breach the security gates protecting the ambassador, the undeterred terrorists doused the interior of the villa with gasoline and set the building on fire before withdrawing. Blinded by smoke, Wickland is forced to try leading the ambassador and Smith to safety outside, but they quickly become separated in the flames. Only Wickland makes it outside, where a crowd of curious locals have begun to assemble. He repeatedly re-enters the building, almost dying from smoke inhalation, but cannot find Stevens or Smith. Unwilling to stand by any longer, Roan, Silva, Tig, Tonto, and Boone defy Bob's stand-down order and embark toward the villa with a civilian translator named Amal. Oz and Sona arrive at the annex shortly afterward and assist Bob and the CIA officers with ensuring that their much more defensible compound is secured, while also planning their escape route. 400 miles away in Tripoli, Doherty is frustrated that no military assets from the neighboring bases are being deployed to protect the villa, and his small GRS team commandeers a private jet along with a couple of local Delta Force operators to provide backup themselves. Roan's team is heavily engaged by terrorists as they advance to the villa, but they are also joined by a number of friendly militia members.
Hello, Captain America. I'm fighting for my country.
However, the disorganized 17 Feb members are unable to coordinate an effective counteroffensive, and Tonto suspects that their commander may even be in league with Ansar al-Sharia.
خليني أنا أتكلم معاهم.
Wait, who are you talking to?
خليني أتكلم معاهم.
Who's on the phone?
Okay. I call attackers. Maybe I negotiate surrender.
Well, you call the attack. You have their phone number? How the do you have their phone number?
I know a good buy, but I know a bad guys.
What?
Tonto, get in here.
GRS secures the DSS agents, including Wickland, who is nearly delirious from smoke inhalation due to his relentless attempts to rescue Ambassador Stevens. Finally finding a supply of oxygen masks, GRS and DSS manage to locate Sean Smith inside the engulfed building, but he has died from smoke inhalation. In the face of renewed attacks from fresh waves of terrorists, the Libyan allies cover the retreat of the Americans as they are forced to withdraw from the villa without locating the ambassador. Heavily disoriented, Wickland initially drives the DSS agents in the wrong direction, despite Silva frantically trying to divert him. The DSS vehicle comes under heavy fire from the terrorists. Oh yeah, and then this happens.
AK, coming up, 8 o'clock. This window's not gonna hold.
Shoot that son of a bitch!
This is the most Michael Bay moment in this movie, and there is no reference to it happening in the book, and I don't care, and I love movies! Despite the ongoing danger, both teams eventually evade their attackers and return safely to the annex with Smith's body.
Who's gonna bring him inside?
Stays right here, Chief.
We exfil out, it's gonna be quick.
What about the ambassador?
No one could survive that.
As they are now in a combat situation, Roan assumes command of the annex security, while Bob and the CIA officers continue to try to get help from Washington and their local contacts. The GRS and able DSS agents take defensive positions on the rooftops of the 4 main buildings within the annex compound, as suspicious cars begin amassing near the houses nearby. For the next several hours, the American defenders successfully repel multiple assaults, killing many of their attackers. Doherty's team arrives at Benghazi airport, but their Libyan militia allies are equally disorganized in providing escorts and rescue vehicles, and hours are wasted before they can even begin their incursion into the city. The only backup the Annex has is a Predator drone circling overhead, but it never engages the terrorists with its Hellfire missile, being used only to provide surveillance to Washington and the military. Sona and the CIA officers make repeated pleas to the military for any form of air support. Military units in other countries are placed on standby but never deployed.
There's an F-16, 365 days, 24/7. It's a quick response base.
Or bring it in from Singanella. It's a f***ing pedal jam from Italy to here.
20 minutes.
I am not requesting firepower. All I want is that you give these assholes outside our gate a low, loud f*** you flyover. My authority? My authority is that if you don't send, Americans are going to die. Including the one talking to you right now.
Bob regretfully notifies the Annex that Ambassador Stevens' body has been identified at a Benghazi hospital. He was found by local citizens outside the burning villa, apparently having managed to escape outside before succumbing to his fatal smoke inhalation. Roan warns that even this grievous news may only be a ploy to lure them into a trap at the hospital, and they continue to protect their position. A lone car suspiciously pulls up outside the walls of the compound, but Tonto cannot engage it as the occupants are not holding weapons, although one of them is holding a cell phone. After the vehicle retreats, Roan grimly speculates that the man on the cell phone may have been acquiring targeting coordinates. Sleep-deprived and running low on ammunition, the GRS team is finally able to guide Doherty's team into the Annex in the early morning hours. The CIA team prepares to evacuate, while Roan reunites with his friend Doherty on the rooftop. Doherty advises that the jet they commandeered cannot accommodate the entire Annex and Embassy staffs, with the bodies of Smith and the ambassador, and Roan volunteers his team to remain behind at the airport to guard the two bodies until another evacuation plane can be sent. Moments later, most of Doherty's police and militia escorts abruptly abandon the Annex, as though aware of an impending danger.
Guys. Does anyone else hear that?
Guys, is that a mortar? Mortars incoming. Get cover!
As the final vicious wave of attack begins, Roan, Doherty, Oz, and DSS agent Ubel valiantly return fire, but are exposed to a deadly rain of mortars, with several of them landing on the rooftop of Building C. Oz and Ubel are critically wounded by the blast, with Oz's forearm being nearly severed. Tig and the Delta operators rush to help, but find that both Roan and Doherty were killed in the final assault.
God, watch over him. Guide him where he needs to be. Take care of his family.
Silva arrives shortly after, and is devastated to learn that both of his former SEAL teammates were killed.
Answer, Roan.
Roan's not with us anymore.
Staff inside desperately attempts to render medical aid to Oz and Ubel as a second massive convoy of armored vehicles approaches the Annex. Tonto prepares to go down fighting, but is instead given a friendly hand gesture by one of the armed men, and tearfully realizes that their allied militias have finally arrived. Stunned by the harrowing night, Bob refuses to exfil with the others, claiming he has to remain behind to collect intel. Silva furiously orders them to shut up and get in the car. The Annex and Embassy staff are safely evacuated to the airport, where a remorseful Bob thanks Silva and the GRS team for saving the lives of his officers. Despite his injuries, Oz refuses to be carried onto the plane, insisting on walking out on his own. The plane takes off, while the 4 remaining GRS soldiers stand vigil over the bodies of Roan, Doherty, and Smith. A vehicle arrives from the hospital shortly afterward, delivering the body of Ambassador Stevens.
There's no way. No way those mortars found us by chance. They had to be set up on us days or weeks ago.
My brother served 20 years in the Canadian Artillery. He's confirmed Teague's statement as being 100% accurate, particularly in an urban environment. 13 hours after the attacks began, a second plane finally arrives to evacuate the American soldiers, supplied by members of Gaddafi's former military. The evacuation from Libya is completed without ever receiving reinforcements from Washington or any of the neighboring American military bases.
It's over now. I'm done. I'm coming home. For good. No. No, I'm just lucky. I'm just lucky. He didn't make it. Ron's not coming home. I love you so much.
As the film ends, Virginia stonecarver Tim Johnston etches 2 new stars on the marble CIA memorial wall in honor of Roan's and Doherty's sacrifices. In the aftermath, Oz recovers the use of his injured arm after more than a dozen surgeries. Silva, Boone, Oz, Tig, and Tonto retire from the CIA to live with their families, although Tonto and Boone continue to work as civilian tactical instructors. Heck, they even trained American Gunchick.
It's American Gunchick.
I'm Chris Tano Pirano. Dave Boone Benton.
And it's Gun Day Monday.
I don't care what the commie film critics had to say, this was a great movie, and I sincerely believe that as far as marketing was concerned, it was deliberately suppressed by both the critics and media because it came out in the same year Hillary Clinton was running for president. The events depicted took place at the tail end of Barack Obama's second presidential election cycle, while Clinton was serving as Secretary of State, and there is no question that the entire debacle has been a lingering black eye to the administration in the years since, with the media working overtime to put lipstick onto that particular pig. Believe me, there were a whole lot of blue-haired politicians, journalists, activists, celebrities, and various other who wanted this movie to fail, and I think they were successful to some extent. 13 Hours is one of the lower-grossing Michael Bay films during its disappointing theatrical run, although it has steadily increased in popularity and appreciation in the years since. The efforts to make people forget about this movie have been matched only by the efforts to make people forget about the actual Benghazi terrorist attack. The 2012 story fell off the news cycle with no conclusive report out of Washington as to what precipitated the deadly siege, but at least it's been examined by top men who have whittled it down to only 3 possible scenarios.
The fact is, we had 4 dead Americans. Was it because of a protest, or was it because of guys out for a walk one night who decided they'd go kill some Americans? What difference at this point does it make?
You're the devil.
Now, I am as blue-collar grunty as any grunt who ever grunted, but I would tend to think, based on the fact that 2 American facilities a mile away from each other were attacked, one of which was deliberately covert, on the memorial of 9/11 by an overwhelming force of combatants armed with both small arms and carefully calibrated artillery, that a 4th option would be this was a coordinated and exhaustively planned terrorist attack preceded by weeks of surveillance, but I do concede that it was less than 2 months away from a presidential election, so understandably an attack that ended in the deaths of 4 Americans could only be labeled an act of terror. Seriously, go back and rewatch the hearings. The word terror was used, the word terrorism was not, and I promise you that was intentional. This is a topic that actively enrages me. Here's a more likable Latina YouTube cook being unfairly stereotyped, admittedly by me, but balancing it out by being unreasonably attractive.
Hey, googly woogly!
I didn't even bother to pick a clip where she's cooking. But while I'm all too happy to blame politics for so much of what happened, and so much of what was not allowed to be brought to light by the media, both the movie and original book were crafted by more high-road people than myself. They were content to focus solely on the heroic actions of the defenders of the Benghazi Special Mission and the CIA Annex. For all my love of movies, this is one time where I highly recommend you also seek out and read the book. It was a page-turner that I read in one night and one of the few literal instances of my life of I couldn't put it down. Fantastic book. How much is really true in a true story of war? It's pretty obvious that every exchange of gunfire probably didn't happen exactly as depicted, as the chaos of war is always going to end up with conflicting accounts from the survivors. And because we're dealing with a Michael Bay adaptation, the rule of thumb is the biggest booms in the movie probably didn't go boom in the book or in real life. For example, there's a scene where the terrorists have some form of improvised heavy ordnance loaded onto a bus, and the GRS defenders open fire on it, blowing up the bus. It's a nice big boom in the movie, but it's nowhere in the actual account. However, many other depictions of the combat are accurate to the accounts. It would have been too easy to have great scenes showing waves of terrorists storming the annex from every side at once, with the defenders returning fire in every direction. It would have looked super cool, but that isn't what happened, and it isn't what's depicted. The terrorists usually engaged only one side of the perimeter wall at a time to maximize the amount of firepower they could throw at the GRS defenders. This is clearly shown after one combat scene where Sully confirmed they never fired a shot, as their quadrant wasn't engaged. It's those little touches of reality that make a good action movie great. I've also noticed when reading books like 13 Hours, No Easy Day, or In the Company of Heroes, that the soldiers are depicted somewhat more emotionally in the film versions, whereas their actions in the books are much more analytical, focused, and honed by their years of training and experience. There's plenty of drama and emotion in real life, but that happens after the crisis. Most experienced soldiers are trained to switch it off until the battle is done, and that's just not as entertaining to watch. So it's unrealistic, but it's also forgivable. However, the biggest surprise to me was how many small details were translated from the book to the screen. During one lull in the combat, Sona brings some food and drinks to a rooftop for Oz, and she trips at the top of the ladder. This would be a normal thing to include in a movie to depict Sona as less competent in the field, or even to portray her in a sexist way compared to the masculine soldiers, but it's actually just a thing that happened. She tripped in the dark, like any one of us would. After Oz is horrifically injured by the mortar blast, he walks himself into the building and tells the CIA officers that they need to get him naked to ensure that they find every shrapnel injury. Sona begins frantically searching for the trauma shears to cut off his clothes, and Oz tells her,
"Trauma shears, top shelf on the right."
Again, it's an actual detail from the book, as Oz was surprised that he remembered the random detail of where he'd earlier seen the trauma shears. Also got to give a shout out to Oz's actor, Max Martini, not because he's a particularly great actor, but because he's one of the best tough guy actors in Hollywood. Anytime you see that man wearing fatigues, you know you're about to witness a true cinematic badass in everything from The Unit to Captain Phillips, and even in that awful Netflix movie where he's somehow fighting boson condensates, and now I kind of want to watch that one again. Another thing I found interesting in contrasting the book and movie is that two of the GRS soldiers, Silva and Boone, were shown with their faces blurred in the film's end credits, and seem to have been less willing to divulge particulars of their private lives to the writers and filmmakers. Not exactly unusual for people who have done work for the CIA and probably still have fatwa on their heads. For that reason, greater liberties were taken with their characters in the film. Silva's family is depicted as a pregnant wife and 2 young daughters, which is not stated in the book, and Boone is depicted as philosophically inclined, being jokingly referred to by Roan as a Zen master, which is not found anywhere in the original account either. I don't know which version of the characters is truer to their personal realities, but it is an interesting note on how a real-life character's participation in production, or lack thereof, can impact a finished film. Also, it was pretty great to see Jim and Roy from The Office reunited more genially as a couple of military badasses.
Welcome to Club Med.
I watched all 9 seasons of The Office and mostly enjoyed it, although hands down Parks and Recreation was the better show. However, I was never fully sold on John Krasinski until this movie. Then he seriously impressed me again in A Quiet Place in 2018, and now I'm actively looking forward to whatever he comes out with next. Just never forgive Disney Marvel for what they did to him in Doctor Strange 2. The character of Roan is also altered for the movie, depicted rather epically by James Badge Dale as being the GRS team leader. In the book, he was an elite and experienced soldier, but the team was actually led by an unnamed 7th man who was barely referenced, and whose position seems to have been more administrative. However, I'm more than okay with this change from the book, as I think James Badge Dale gives the best performance in the movie, and the most natural. I particularly like that neither Dale or Krasinski have been historically associated with action heroes, and this movie was kind of their breakout into the action genre. Pablo Schreiber gets the funnest role as Tonto, the soldier who seems to have had the largest role in the creation of Mitchell Zuckoff's book. He's a jocular but temperamental soldier, which plays particularly well when he is paired with David Denman's more placid and deadpan Boone.
I'm not thinking about that one.
Be here all night.
All right.
You know, I do have a gun in my cubby, and I will use it.
David Costable as Bob is unfortunately saddled with a staple of too many Michael Bay films, the overly arrogant and bureaucratic intellectual who gets put in his place by the boots-on-the-ground soldiers. However, even this trope is much more tempered than usual, and Bob gets a few great moments, particularly in his interactions with Roan, and when he has to rally his officers to prepare for the annexes of defense and evacuation.
You're going to exfil from here in 30 to 40 minutes. We're going to go directly to the airport and get a plane. If that doesn't work, we're going to go to the port and we're going to steal a boat. Now listen. You're trained to do this. It's your job. You can do it. We're all responsible for our lives, and what you do right now in this room will determine whether we live or
Even
die.
the critics who disliked this movie were in agreement that it was a much more mature and respectful effort from Michael Bay, and I'll agree with them wholly on that. I rank it as tied with The Rock for Michael Bay's best movie, and I wouldn't be surprised if it even surpasses his 1996 classic in the years to come, as it is another film that I appreciate more every time I rewatch it. The ending is a particularly touching tribute to those who gave their lives in Libya that night, and it reminded me that no matter what faults Michael Bay may have as a filmmaker, a lack of respect for fallen heroes is not one of them. The courage and sacrifices of the secret soldiers of Benghazi saved the lives of more than 30 Americans in one deadly night, and I will always be grateful to Michael Bay for making the controversial decision to honor that. Could this movie be made today? Bad Muslims.
whenever bullets start to fly, I always feel protected. You know, like as long as I'm doing the right thing, God will take care of me.
Good Christians.
Every time I get close
Put your headscarf on. I need your eyes and your ears, not your mouth.
Presented with a... Oh, forget it. Just cut to the feminist grid.
Don't you mess around with him.
Anyway, should Christ Terry, I'll see you in the next video. Jesus loves you. Vote Lane for King of Canada. Thank goodness he said,
Grab him by the pussy.
and let's make movies great again.